At 4:30 in the morning on January 3, 2026, Donald Trump posted 7 words on Truth Social that rewrote the rules of modern warfare. The post contained no video, no photograph, just text, "Maduro is in custody. God bless America." Within minutes, the servers crashed, not from traffic, though that came too, but because intelligence agencies from 47 countries simultaneously attempted to verify whether the President of the United States had just announced via social media that American forces had captured the leader of a sovereign nation while most of the Western Hemisphere slept. 2 hours earlier at 2 a.m. Venezuelan time, every light in Caracas went dark. Not a brownout, not a rolling blackout, a hard kill. The kind of darkness that doesn't flicker back on because the thing controlling the power isn't broken, it's been murdered. U.S. Cyber Command had spent 18 months mapping the vulnerabilities in Corpolec, Venezuela's state power company. They found 11 entry points. They only needed 1. At 2 a.m., they used all 11 simultaneously. Redundancy meant nothing when every backup system died at the same moment. 14 minutes later, Delta Force operators descended from helicopters onto the roof of Fuerte Tiuna, the military complex where Nicolás Maduro had been sleeping. There was no beach landing, no armada visible on the horizon, no warning. The guards stationed at the perimeter weren't overwhelmed. They were gone. They had been paid in Bitcoin 3 days earlier and had simply walked away from their posts sometime after midnight. The men who were supposed to die protecting their president had already deposited their bribes into cold wallets and driven to safe houses arranged by intermediaries they'd never met. The entire operation, from blackout to custody, took 45 minutes. This is the story of the world's first crowd-funded coup, a 2-year psychological siege disguised as a joke, a data harvesting operation hidden inside a donation page, and a military strike so precisely calibrated that it cost less to execute than a single F-35 fighter jet. The $15 million bounty on Nicolás Maduro's head never got paid to whoever captured him. The actual price of regime change, when you stripped away the theater, was closer to $2 million in cryptocurrency and a promise of amnesty. The United States didn't invade Venezuela. They purchased it at a 90% discount. And the website that made it all possible? It was still selling T-shirts when the helicopters landed. Nicolás Maduro had survived everything. He had survived the death of Hugo Chavez, the man who plucked him from obscurity and placed him 1 heartbeat from absolute power. He had survived the collapse of oil prices that should have bankrupted his government. He had survived hyperinflation so severe that the currency became worth less than the paper it was printed on. Venezuelans literally weighed money instead of counting it because the stacks were too large to manage otherwise. He had survived international sanctions, frozen assets, diplomatic isolation, and the slow strangulation of his economy by forces he couldn't see and couldn't fight. He had even survived the most embarrassing attempted coup in modern history. In May 2020, a group of American mercenaries led by a former Green Beret named Jordan Goudreau attempted to invade Venezuela from the Colombian coast. Operation Geddon, they called it. The plan was simple: land on a beach, seize control of an airport, extract Maduro, install the opposition leader Juan Guaido as president, collect a $212 million contract. The execution was catastrophic. The mercenaries got seasick during the crossing. Several were vomiting when they reached the shore. Venezuelan fishermen, actual fishermen, not military personnel, spotted them and called the police. 8 attackers were killed. The survivors were paraded on Venezuelan state television looking stunned and sunburned, their tactical gear suddenly absurd against the backdrop of their obvious failure. The world laughed. Late-night comedians made jokes about the Bay of Piglets. Intelligence analysts published contemptuous assessments of Goudreau's operational security, which had been so poor that he'd announced the invasion on Twitter before it happened. Maduro himself went on television grinning, displaying captured equipment, declaring that Bolivarian socialism had once again defeated Yankee imperialism. What nobody understood at the time was that Operation Gedeon was the best thing that ever happened to American regime change planning. The failure taught Washington something invaluable. Private actors could create chaos that the government could disavow. The line between rogue mercenary operation and official military action had become blurry enough to exploit, and Maduro, in his triumphant mockery of the beach landing disaster, revealed exactly how his security apparatus responded to threats. He showed the Americans his reflexes. He demonstrated his blind spots. He handed them a playbook for how to beat him. 4 years later, they would use every page. By late 2024, Maduro's Venezuela had become a study in deterioration. The oil industry that once made the country the wealthiest in South America had collapsed to a fraction of its former output. Refineries built for $5 billion sat rusting because there was no money to maintain them. The electrical grid failed so regularly that Venezuelans planned their lives around blackouts the way people in other countries plan around weather. Hospitals performed surgeries by flashlight. Grocery stores, the ones that remained open, accepted payment in US dollars, Colombian pesos, Bitcoin, anything except the bolivar. 6 million people had fled the country, walking across borders with whatever they could carry, creating the largest refugee crisis in Latin American history. Inside Miraflores Palace, Maduro's paranoia had become its own form of governance. He trusted no one. His inner circle shrank constantly as he purged anyone he suspected of disloyalty, which, in practice, meant anyone who delivered bad news. The competent generals who might have organized effective resistance were gone, replaced by sycophants whose primary qualification was their willingness to tell the president what he wanted to hear. The Cuban intelligence officers who actually ran his security had noticed the pattern. They started keeping their own exit plans. Maduro stopped wearing the casual tracksuits that had been his signature. By December 2025, he appeared on television exclusively in full military dress uniform, medals gleaming, shoulders rigid. The costume change was supposed to project strength. It projected fear instead. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. What was coming wore the face of a joke. In late 2024, Erik Prince announced the launch of Casi Venezuela Spanish for Almost There, Venezuela. The premise was absurd. A crowdfunding campaign to topple a government. The website featured slick graphics, patriotic Venezuelan imagery, and a donation button. For $50, you could sponsor a freedom fighter. For $500, you received a commemorative T-shirt. For $5,000, Prince promised a personal thank you call. The mainstream press covered it as a curiosity, a grift, the latest scheme from the founder of Blackwater, who had spent 20 years monetizing American military power in increasingly creative ways. Late-night hosts made jokes. Congressional Democrats demanded an investigation. Nothing happened. The website raised $98 million in 3 months. But here's what the donors didn't know. Every time someone entered their information on the Casi website, name, address, email, payment details, they were contributing to something far more valuable than the fund. They were building a map American intelligence had been trying for years to identify the Venezuelan diaspora's connections to people still inside the country. Who had family in the military? Who had contacts in the government? Who sent money home and to whom? The data was fragmented across banking systems, social media platforms, immigration records. Casi consolidated it into a single database, voluntarily submitted, perfectly legal, and that was only the front door. The website's source code contained a second feature, one that never appeared in any press release. If you accessed Casi from a Venezuelan government IP address, if you were a regime official checking the site to monitor the opposition, to identify traitors, to see how much money the gringos were raising, the page planted a tracker in your browser. Not malware exactly, something subtler, a cookie that phoned home every time you accessed another government system, mapping the architecture of regime cybersecurity from the inside. Maduro's own paranoia betrayed him. His intelligence services checked the Casi website constantly, looking for threats, Every visit gave American signals intelligence another piece of the puzzle. By December 2025, Cyber Command had a complete topology of Corpal X control systems. They knew which substations fed power to which military installations. They knew which backup generators would kick in and which ones were broken and only listed as functional because the maintenance officers were stealing the fuel budget. They knew everything, and they knew because the Venezuelan government couldn't stop watching the website that was supposedly raising money to overthrow them. September 16, 2024. The headline was small, buried beneath larger stories about the American presidential campaign. A U.S. Navy SEAL named Wilbert Joseph Castañeda Gomez had been arrested in Caracas. The State Department issued a terse statement. Castañeda was traveling in a personal capacity. He was not on official business. The United States government had no knowledge of his activities. The standard disavowal script. The Venezuelan government paraded Castañeda on television just as they had paraded the Gedeon mercenaries 4 years earlier. He looked healthier than those men had looked, better fed, calmer, almost bored. He answered questions in fluent Spanish which he had learned from his Venezuelan mother. He expressed regret for violating Venezuelan sovereignty. He said he had been motivated by personal beliefs, not government orders. The whole performance felt rehearsed, but Maduro's interrogators couldn't figure out what the real script was supposed to be. What they didn't know was that Castañeda had already completed his mission. Before his arrest in the 17 seconds between when Venezuelan counterintelligence identified him and when they moved to detain him, Castañeda made a phone call. The call lasted 4 seconds, long enough to transmit a burst of encrypted data, but not long enough to trace. The data contained response time measurements, from the moment Castañeda did something suspicious to the moment security forces arrived, 11 minutes, 43 seconds. From the moment he was identified to the moment he was cuffed, 17 seconds. From the moment of his arrest to the moment Maduro was personally informed, 4 hours, 12 minutes. The Americans now knew exactly how fast the Venezuelan security apparatus could respond to a threat. They knew the lag between detection and reaction. They knew how long they would have. Castañeda was the canary in the coal mine. He went to Caracas to get caught. His arrest gave Washington something else too, a hostage, an American citizen in Venezuelan custody, a face to put on television, a name to invoke in press conferences, a justification for whatever came next. When President Trump took office in January 2025, the rescue of Wilbert Castañeda became a talking point. The administration demanded his release. Venezuela refused. The standoff provided cover for everything that followed. December 15, 2025. President Trump signed an executive order declaring fentanyl precursor chemicals to be weapons of mass destruction. The designation seemed absurd on its face. Fentanyl was a drug problem, not a military threat, but the legal implications were profound. Under existing law, the president could authorize military strikes against WMD facilities without a formal declaration of war. Venezuela had been accused for years of allowing drug trafficking through its territory. Several labs had been identified by satellite imagery in remote areas near the Colombian border. 3 days later, explosions lit up the Gulf of Venezuela. The official story was a cartel dispute, rival trafficking organizations fighting over territory. The Venezuelan government blamed Colombian paramilitaries. The Colombian government blamed Venezuelan negligence. Neither government mentioned the low-flying shadows that indigenous fishermen had reported in the hours before the blasts, silhouettes that moved too quietly and too precisely to be civilian aircraft. The December 18 strike was a dress rehearsal. American MQ-9 Reaper drones tested Venezuelan air defense response times. The answer was encouraging. There was essentially no response at all. The radar installations that were supposed to detect incoming aircraft had been poorly maintained for years. The surface-to-air missile batteries that were supposed to shoot down intruders were short on trained operators and shorter on functioning equipment. Venezuela's military looked formidable on paper. In practice, it was a hollow shell, The drug labs that were destroyed in the strike weren't drug labs at all. Satellite analysis later revealed that the targets were Iranian drone assembly facilities. Tehran had been shipping Shahed 136 components to Venezuela for months, building a capability that could threaten American interests across the Caribbean. The narco label was a legal fiction, a way to destroy Iranian military technology without triggering a wider conflict. The Venezuelans couldn't complain without admitting they'd been hosting Iranian weapons production. The Iranians couldn't complain without revealing the extent of their presence. Everyone stayed quiet, and Washington learned that when the time came, nothing would stand in the way. The two Russian Tupolev Tu-160 bombers arrived in Venezuela in late November 2025. It was supposed to be a show of force, proof that Russia still stood with its Latin American ally, proof that the Monroe Doctrine meant nothing in the 21st century. The bombers were photographed extensively. Venezuelan state media celebrated the visit. Maduro posed with Russian officers, smiling broadly, projecting confidence. The bombers left empty. The cargo containers that had accompanied them, containers that observers assumed contained weapons, spare parts, or technical equipment, returned to Russia, filled with nothing but packing material. Whatever Russia had brought to Venezuela, they took it all back with them. The message was unmistakable. Moscow was cutting its losses. Putin had problems of his own. The war in Ukraine was devouring resources. Western sanctions were biting deeper every month, and propping up a collapsing petrostate 8,000 miles away had become an expense without a return. The back channels had been active for weeks. American diplomats had offered Russia a trade, stay out of Venezuela, and the United States would reconsider certain weapons shipments to Ukraine. The details remained classified. The outcome was visible to anyone paying attention. When American helicopters descended on Caracas 2 months later, no Russian aircraft rose to intercept them. No Russian electronic warfare systems jammed their communications. No Russian advisors stood beside Venezuelan officers in the command centers that went dark. Maduro had been counting on Moscow. Moscow had already written him off. Erik Prince never appeared on any official organizational chart for Operation Southern Spear. His name never appeared in any briefing document, any authorization memo, any chain of command. Officially, Prince was a private citizen running a controversial but legal advocacy organization. The Casi website was protected by the First Amendment. The donations were processed through legitimate payment processors. Everything was above board. But Erik Prince had spent his entire adult life operating in the space between official and unofficial, legal and plausible, military and private. He had built Blackwater into the largest private military contractor in the world, deploying more personnel to Iraq than several NATO countries combined. He had advised governments on 4 continents. He had proposed a plan to privatize the entire Afghan war, replacing American soldiers with corporate mercenaries. He understood better than almost anyone alive that modern warfare was as much about money and information as it was about bullets and bombs. The leaked audio from a Casi donor call revealed his thinking. "We don't need the Marines," Prince told a room of wealthy Venezuelan exiles. "We just need the market to price in his exit." The phrase sounded like financial jargon. It was actually a strategy. If enough people believed Maduro would fall, they would act accordingly. Military officers would reconsider their loyalty. Businessmen would hedge their bets. The regime's supporters would start making contingency plans. Belief became self-fulfilling. The money Casi raised wasn't really for weapons or operations. It was for confidence. Every dollar donated was a vote for regime change, a signal that the diaspora was ready, a data point that American intelligence could use to prove the opposition was organized. The bounty market operated on the same principle. The U.S. government had offered $15 million for Maduro under the Narcotics Rewards Program, a standing offer that had existed for years. The Casi amplified the offer, publicizing it, encouraging private donations to sweeten the pot, creating the impression that Maduro's capture was not a question of whether but when. Inside Venezuela, military officers started doing math. The $2 million bribe that ultimately opened the gates of Fuerte Tiuna wasn't paid by the U.S. government. It was paid by intermediaries connected to Casi, funded by donations, routed through cryptocurrency wallets that couldn't be traced. The first crowdfunded regime change in history cost less than a Hollywood action movie to produce. January 2, 2026, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, the U.S. Coast Guard intercepted a tanker called the Centuries approximately 40 miles off the Venezuelan coast. The vessel was accused of carrying sanctioned Venezuelan oil. Coast Guard cutters surrounded the ship. The standoff was broadcast on maritime emergency frequencies picked up by Venezuelan Naval Command and escalated immediately to the highest levels of the regime. The Venezuelan Navy scrambled. 3 patrol vessels departed Puerto Cabello to investigate. A frigate was ordered out from La Guaira. For the next 8 hours, the bulk of Venezuela's operational naval assets were positioned in international waters, watching the Centuries confrontation, waiting for orders that never came. The Centuries was carrying cooking oil, not petroleum, not anything sanctioned, just vegetable oil bound for a processing facility in Trinidad. The interception was a feint way to draw Venezuelan naval attention away from the coast at the exact moment when American aircraft would need to approach Caracas from the Caribbean. By the time Venezuelan officers realized the Century situation was a distraction, their ships were too far out of position to matter. The operation that followed was planned with the precision of a surgical procedure and the speed of a car accident. At 2 a.m. Venezuelan time, Caracas went dark. The blackout wasn't like the rolling failures Venezuelans had become accustomed to. This was total. The entire metropolitan area, 7 million people, lost power simultaneously. Traffic lights died. Hospital backup generators kicked in for approximately 30 seconds before they died too. The control systems that should have managed the outage had been compromised. The backups thought they were receiving power that wasn't there and shut down to protect circuits that were already dead. In Fuerte Tiuna, the military command center was supposed to switch to independent power within 90 seconds. The independent power never came. The fuel for the emergency generators had been siphoned off gradually over the preceding months by officers who sold it on the black market. The maintenance logs showed full tanks. The tanks were empty. At 2:14 a.m., helicopters appeared over the complex. There were 3 of them. MH-60 Blackhawks, modified for special operations, running silent with their navigation lights off, visible only as shadows against a slightly lighter sky. They had crossed from a staging area in Colombia less than 2 hours earlier, refueled at a forward position that officially didn't exist, and covered the remaining distance to Caracas at treetop height to avoid radar detection. The detection never came anyway. The radar installations were down with the rest of the grid. The helicopters hovered over the residential compound within Fuerte Tiuna where Maduro was sleeping. Delta Force operators, C Squadron, according to sources who spoke later, descended on fast ropes. They hit the roof without resistance. The guards who should have been stationed there were gone. The officers who should have commanded them were gone. The checkpoint at the building entrance was unmanned. Someone had paid the right people to disappear. At 2:22 a.m., operators breached the building. Maduro's personal security detail was not Venezuelan military. It was Cuban. Officers from the G2, Cuba's intelligence service, had protected the Venezuelan president for years, trusted more than his own countrymen. When the breach alarm should have sounded, they didn't, because the alarms needed power. The Cubans realized something was wrong. They moved to extract Maduro from his sleeping quarters. The plan was to get him to La Roca, a hardened bunker beneath the complex that had been built during the Cold War to survive nuclear attack. The bunker had its own power, its own communications, its own air supply. If Maduro could reach La Roca, he could hold out for hours, maybe days, long enough for loyalist forces to organize a response. They made it 30 feet down the hallway. The Delta operators were waiting. Flashbang grenades detonated in the confined space designed to blind and deafen without killing. The concussive force was overwhelming. 2 Cuban guards collapsed. A third raised his weapon and was shot in the shoulder. He survived, though his arm would never work properly again. Maduro himself fell to the ground with his hands over his ears, screaming something in Spanish that the American operators didn't understand and probably didn't care about. By 2027 a.m., the president of Venezuela was in flex cuffs. The extraction was equally efficient. Maduro was moved to the roof, loaded into a helicopter, and flown out of Venezuelan airspace before the sun began to rise. Venezuelan military command, operating on battery-powered radios in a blacked-out city, didn't confirm his location until nearly 400 a.m. By then, he was already over the Caribbean. The Truth Social post went live at 4:30 a.m. Eastern Time, approximately 2 hours after the capture. The metadata suggested it had been drafted days in advance and scheduled for publication once a confirmation code was received. The syntax was unmistakably Trump short, punchy, triumphant, but the timestamp indicated it was written long before the helicopters lifted off. The date was not an accident. January 3, 2026 was exactly 36 years to the day after Manuel Noriega surrendered to American forces following the invasion of Panama. Trump had chosen the anniversary deliberately. He wanted the historical parallel. He wanted the headline. The international response was immediate and furious. At the United Nations, the Venezuelan ambassador demanded an emergency Security Council meeting. Russia and China, both permanent members with veto power, condemned the operation as a violation of international law. Cuba recalled its ambassador from Washington. Nicaragua threatened to expel American diplomats. Mexico's president called it an act of imperialism that shames the hemisphere. None of it mattered. By noon on January 3rd, Chevron tankers were repositioning in the Caribbean. The oil company had maintained skeleton operations in Venezuela throughout the sanctions era, waiting for exactly this moment. The infrastructure was degraded but functional. The reserves were enormous. Within 72 hours, the first shipments of Venezuelan crude were moving toward American refineries. The question of who would sign the new oil contracts remained technically unresolved. Juan Guaido, the opposition leader whom the United States had recognized as Venezuela's legitimate president since 2019, was flown from Washington to Caracas on January 4th. He held a press conference in Miraflores Palace, the same building where Maduro had governed for a decade. He announced a transitional government. He promised elections within 18 months. The American general who actually controlled Caracas, a three-star named Robert Mitchell, who had commanded the Southern Spear ground component, stood just off camera during Guaido's announcement. Mitchell's staff had written most of the speech. The Venezuelan military did not resist. Senior officers who had remained loyal to Maduro discovered in the hours after his capture that their bank accounts had been frozen, their families had been contacted, their options had been explained. The amnesty offer was simple: cooperate and face no prosecution, resist and face extradition. By January 5th, every major military installation had accepted the terms. Diosdado Cabello, the regime's second most powerful figure, disappeared. His television show, Con Eso Dando, a propaganda program where he had mocked American imperialism for years, had aired for the last time on January 2nd. Reviewers of the footage noticed that Cabello seemed distracted during the broadcast. His jokes fell flat. He kept glancing off camera at someone or something the audience couldn't see. Cabello resurfaced 3 weeks later in Havana. He has not returned to Venezuela. The Bitcoin general was never publicly identified. Intelligence sources confirmed that a senior officer rank of brigadier general, according to some accounts, had facilitated the payment that emptied the security post at Fuerte Tiuna. He did not want cash. Cash was traceable, seizable, useless once the banks froze accounts. He wanted cryptocurrency. The payment, approximately $2 million in Bitcoin, was transferred to a wallet he controlled sometime on December 31st. By January 3, he was gone. The real estate records in Doral, Florida, told a similar story. In December 2025, a single broker sold 15 luxury condominiums to anonymous LLCs. The buyers were Venezuelan. They had been purchasing lifeboats for months, preparing for a future they knew was coming even if they didn't know exactly when. When the helicopters landed, their families were already safe in Miami. Nicolás Maduro's current location remains classified. The rumors say Guantanamo Bay. The detention facility there holds enemy combatants, a legal designation that exists outside the normal criminal justice system. Maduro has not been charged with a crime in any American court. No extradition paperwork has been filed. No trial date has been set. He simply disappeared into the American security apparatus, as Noriega did 36 years before him. The gold bars found in Maduro's half-packed suitcase were inventoried by Delta Force operators before the helicopters departed. 37 bars, approximately $2.8 million at current market prices. The USB drives were cataloged but not immediately accessed. Their contents remain classified. Analysts suspect they contain cryptocurrency wallet keys, Maduro's personal escape fund accumulated over years of corruption, never needed because his escape never happened. Wilbur Castaneda, the Navy SEAL whose arrest in September 2024 had provided the hostage justification for everything that followed, was recovered during the raid. He had been held at an undisclosed facility outside Caracas. His condition was described as stable but impaired. The trident insignia, the badge that signifies membership in the SEALs, had been stripped from him before he departed for Venezuela in 2024. Whether it has been restored is unknown. His mother, who was born in Venezuela and had spent 18 months not knowing if her son was alive, appeared on television 3 days after his recovery. She did not criticize the operation. She did not praise it. She said only, "He's coming home. That's all that matters." The economic aftermath was swift and brutal. At the moment of Maduro's capture, the Venezuelan bolivar lost approximately 4,000% of its remaining value on the black market. Currency traders in Bogota and Miami, who had been watching the situation develop, dumped their holdings the instant the Truth Social post appeared. By sunrise, the bolivar was worth less as a medium of exchange than as fuel, literally. Street vendors in Maracaibo reportedly began burning stacks of currency to cook food because the paper was more valuable as kindling than as money. The transition government announced a new currency within the first week. The Bolivar Nuevo, pegged to the US dollar at a fixed rate, was supposed to restore confidence. Early reports suggest the confidence has not been restored. The new currency is printed in Colombia because Venezuela's mints cannot be trusted. The coins are manufactured in China because no Venezuelan facility has the capacity. The oil industry restarted faster than economists expected. Chevron's advanced teams, which had been pre-positioned in Trinidad, reached the major production facilities within 48 hours. The infrastructure was damaged but not destroyed. Production resumed at approximately 30% of pre-crisis capacity within the first month. Full restoration will take years, possibly decades, and will require investments that only the American oil majors can provide. The geopolitical implications are still unfolding. The narco-mad legal framework that Trump used to justify the strike has not been challenged in court. Critics have argued that classifying fentanyl precursors as weapons of mass destruction is an absurd overreach that could justify military action against virtually any country. The administration has not retreated from the classification. Similar designations have been proposed for other drugs, other chemicals, other pretexts. Erik Prince has declined all interviews since January 3. The Casi Venezuela website went offline on January 4th and has not returned. The organization's bank accounts were closed. The donor database, the map of the Venezuelan diaspora that proved so valuable to American intelligence, was reportedly transferred to an undisclosed government agency. The donors who contributed money to fund freedom have received no refunds and no explanation. The model is now proven. Future regime changes need not require invasions. They need not require congressional authorization or UN approval or international coalitions. They require only patience, data, money, and precision. The crowd-funded coup playbook: build a database of dissidents, identify weaknesses in the target's infrastructure, apply economic pressure until the foundations crack, then strike when resistance has been pre-neutralized by bribery and despair works. It worked in Venezuela. It could work elsewhere. Cuba is watching. Nicaragua is watching. The remaining authoritarian governments in America's sphere of influence are recalculating their security arrangements, checking their power grids, wondering which of their officers has been contacted, wondering which websites are harvesting their data, wondering when the lights might go out. Manuel Noriega died in a Panamanian hospital in 2017 after spending 20 years in American and French prisons. He was 83 years old. He had outlived his usefulness and his notoriety. The country he once ruled barely acknowledged his passing. Nicolás Maduro is 52. His location is classified. His future is uncertain. His country moves on without him, pumping oil for American refineries, printing currency in foreign factories, governed by men who answer to generals who answer to Washington. The headquarters of Casi, Venezuela was a rented office suite in Miami's Brickell district, on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that looks out over Biscayne Bay. The suite is empty now. The servers have been removed. The commemorative T-shirts that were never shipped sit in a warehouse in Hialeah, waiting for someone to decide what to do with them. The view from the 42nd floor is spectacular. On a clear day, you can see all the way to the horizon, where the water meets the sky, where the ships carrying Venezuelan oil pass on their way to refineries in Texas and Louisiana. The lights in Caracas came back on January 4th. The power grid is still unreliable. The blackouts still come, though they're shorter now, and they're not coordinated by anyone. They're just the ordinary failures of a broken system trying to repair itself. But every time the lights go out, people remember the night they stayed out, the night the helicopters came, the night everything changed. The operation took 45 minutes. The planning took 2 years. The consequences will last for decades. Somewhere in a facility that doesn't appear on any map, a man who was once the president of a nation of 30 million people sits in a cell. He has no visitors. He makes no statements. He is not charged, not tried, not sentenced, simply held. The world has moved on. The oil is flowing. The currency is stabilized. The transition government is governing. The bus driver who became a dictator is now a ghost. And the T-shirts, the ones that said Yacht Casi almost there, they were right. They just didn't say what they were almost there for.